We live in a time when the freedom of speech is being suppressed. Our traditional values are no longer valued by most. What do we need? Courage. Stay tuned, that's what we're going to discuss today. Thanks for sticking around. I'm glad you decided to come back and join us for our first episode of Let's Discuss. So, first of all, who am I? Well, my name's Austin. I'm just a common man. I don't really consider myself really anything special, but I do believe that each and every one of us has giftings that God has given us. And people have poured into my life. People have helped to give me wisdom over the years and knowledge, and I want to be able to pour that back out. And I've been trying to, over the years, pour into people, friends, and family personally, but I think that there's a time and a place where we could do that in a more public setting, a more public situation, and that'd be useful for everyone. The things that God has given me aren't just for me, but I feel like they're for everyone. So here I am. So courage. Courage, I think, is something that is critically important in this day and age. Freely speaking and speaking our mind about what we value and what we think is true and good is dangerous these days. There's this idea of cancel culture, that if you say something that people don't like or people don't agree with, or even something that's genuinely wrong, sometimes we make mistakes. Sometimes we hold ideas that are wrong. Sometimes we are mistaken or confused. But if you make that mistake, or if you say something that people just don't like for whatever reason, you can lose your job. You can lose influence, and it's kind of a dangerous situation. It's a dangerous thing to do. So what that ends up doing, though, is it silences most voices. It silences people who otherwise would like to speak up and would like to give their mind. And I think that's valuable. I think that's something that we need to protect and something that we need to fight for. And by fight here, I mean offering our opinion up, despite the dangers, despite the circumstances. And that takes courage. Andrew Klavan from The Andrew Klavan Show, you can watch him on YouTube or iTunes. I like a lot of his stuff. He's kind of a deep thinker. One of the things that he talks about is courage being the basis for other virtues, right? Like, you can't really have other virtues without courage. So you can't love unless you're willing to take the risks that love entails. You can't really have justice unless you're willing to stand up against those who do injustice. So I think courage is really at the core of what we need to do. And so that's why I'm speaking up, because I want to have courage and I want to be courageous to do the right thing. So why talk about these things at all? Why bother to be courageous about these? It's not just about protecting the past or protecting tradition. I think a lot of times as conservatives and as Christians, we kind of get stuck in that, just fighting for what's always existed. And that's not necessarily the case. There are times when things are wrong and when things are bad and they do need to be addressed and they do need to be fixed. But it's about fighting for what we know is right and what we know is good. Some things are good and some things are bad. Thoughts have consequences and actions have consequences. And if we really believe that, then we need to encourage certain thoughts and we need to encourage certain actions. And we need to call certain thoughts out as bad and call certain actions out as bad as well. So that requires that we speak up. Not because we think that we're right and we want to prove everyone wrong and we want to shut other people up, but we want what's best for them. If we want what's best for other people, then we're going to encourage them to know the truth and what we think is right and what we think is best. So obviously, we use sometimes extreme examples to prove these things. Not to say that they're the same thing, but to say if it's true in that case, then it's also true in other examples, right? In other cases. So a good example of this would be if somebody's playing out on the road, like a child, right? It is legitimately, rationally, 100% true that it is not in that child's best interest to play in the middle of the road. And it's not going to be loving for that child or helpful for that child if we don't say something, if we don't help to move that child out of the road. And so there are other examples that are less extreme, right? Lifestyles, way that people live their lives that is destructive towards them and towards society. A great example would be there are numerous studies, and maybe later I'll look some up and post them in the comments, that show how important family is for society, like the family unit and the family structure as a whole, as far as the stability, as far as the economics of it. So these things are good for everyone. They're not just good for us, but they're good for others. And if we truly believe that, we should be willing to speak up and to say it. Now, there's all kinds of different directions I guess we could go with this. One of the directions would be just the value of discussion and the value of free speech. So Jordan Peterson, he's a really interesting writer and speaker. He actually wrote a book. It was called The 12 Rules for Life. He has an excellent, I guess you could say maybe a monologue. It was an interview that he was having with somebody, and he was talking about why the First Amendment and freedom of speech is important. And basically the idea is that as society, we resolve our problems and we resolve issues with discussion. And it only works if we can freely discuss. So, not necessarily having a limit on an idea because it's something we don't like, or it's something that we feel isn't good or isn't healthy. I think a good example of this would be there was an employee at Google, I believe his name is Justin Demarais, who wrote this paper about why he thought that there were differences in the amount of genders in engineering and sciences. And so, if you read his paper, it's actually not hateful. His basic idea was more or less along the lines of it's biology. Different people like different things. Doesn't mean that there can't be great engineers and that are women, and that women can't do these things. It's just that they tend not to want to do these things. Something along those lines. And they fired him because of it. Now, I understand they're a private company and they have the right to do whatever they want to do, I suppose. But is that what's actually best for them or for our society? For us not to even be able to discuss it? Maybe he's wrong. But let's at least be able to talk about it. I don't understand why we're not allowed to talk about those things. So courage. We need courage. We need courage to speak out. Speak up for the things that we value. We can see great examples of courage through history. Doesn't always make you friends. A good example would be Winston Churchill. Now, you could say his courage was perhaps mixed together with some arrogance and some brashness, but not a lot of people liked Winston Churchill. He had a lot of things to say. But in World War II with the Nazis, he knew that that was coming and that was wrong, and he spoke out openly about it, and people didn't like him. But when Neville Chamberlain really showed his incompetence and showed that he couldn't handle the situation, they knew who to turn to. And they turned to Churchill, and his courage and his ability to address things head on were really what helped to address the nation, and really what helped to resolve the situation. So here I am. I'm going to be speaking out, and I'm going to be saying what's on my mind and what I think is right and good for all of us. I appreciate your thoughts and comments, and I have things that I can learn from you, just like I believe there's things I can give to you. So I want you to speak up also, and I want you to share what you're thinking, what's on your mind. And it should be a civil discourse. We should be able to talk without hating each other, without getting into fights, and without breaking apart. I feel like, it's kind of like in a marriage, right? If you shove everything down and you're not willing to discuss things, that marriage, that union, isn't going to last. It's only going to be able to last if you can actually communicate about those tough issues and really be able to continue. So thanks for joining me. I hope you come back and listen to my next talk. Take care.